Clair Obscur Expedition 33 was the biggest surprise hit of 2025, and my personal game of the year. What's even more surprising is at the end of the year, during the Game Awards, they surprised everyone with a free update to the game, adding a photo mode. Let's take a look at this photo mode and see what we can learn from it. My name is Mir, let's get started, shall we? To access the photo mode, go ahead and pause the game, and you'll see an option here for photo mode. Now, first thing I'll say is that if you've played the game, then you can tell that a lot of these cutscenes are heavily influenced by film, and I'm happy to say that the photo mode is also influenced by film, so I'll explain it once we get to some of these settings. Once you open the photo mode, the controls are pretty standard affair, but there are two buttons that I want you to take a look at. The first one is the slow mode hold, and the other one is toggle menu. So since I'm on PlayStation, slow mode is L1 for me, and this will help you out, like if you're moving the camera around. Everything moves pretty quick, but if you hold L1 in this case, it'll move everything a lot slower. It's a lot easier to control. And then the other one is the toggle menu. So when you push that, that's where you get the actual controls for the photo mode. So get familiar with your toggle menu button because this is where you'll be switching between the actual settings and the camera movement. So let's kick things off in the camera tab. And here you have your camera roll, which just rotates your image left or right. And if you keep moving far enough, you'll be able to make a portrait image as well. Next is your field of view, and if you move it to the left, this is your telephoto. And if you move it to the right, this is your wide angle. Now, if I move this camera with the wide angle, here you have your wide angle distortion, where your foreground and your background, they look like they're spread apart. They look like they're further away from each other. And if I move the field of view in the opposite direction, in the telephoto direction, this here is your telephoto compression, where your foreground and your background, they look like they're a lot closer to each other. They're being compressed. Now, for field of view, the easiest way to remember this is that the lower the number, the more it's zoomed in, and the higher the number, the more it's zoomed out. If you're working with an actual camera, which is typically marked in millimeters, it's actually the opposite. A smaller number is wide, and a larger number is your telephoto. Next is your aperture, which is marked by f-stops, which they have here, but you'll also see on a real lens. So what this does, it controls your background blur. So f16, that means more is in focus, and if we stop down the aperture, let's say we go to f2, you'll see that you have more blur. This blur in photography is known as bokeh. Next is your sensor width, and it says intensity. So this took me a little bit of time to figure out what they were trying to say here, but I think I figured it out. So your sensor width, I think what they were trying to translate to is the sensor size of a camera. So for example, a full frame camera is at 35 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 35. And if you notice the background, it's very subtle, but if you notice the background, it actually gets blurrier. Now, if we go down in the millimeter size, the intensity, you'll notice there's less background blur, there's less bokeh. So why is that? So think of this as a camera, an actual full frame camera versus your phone. Your phone has a small sensor, and it's not going to compete with the background blur of a actual camera. And I think that's what they were trying to achieve with this sensor width, is what kind of device are you using? So a larger device, like let's say a medium format camera, has a larger sensor size. And because of that, you're going to get a lot better background blur, a lot better bokeh, and it's just overall going to be a nice and pleasing image. Whereas your smartphone is not going to have that background blur. A lot of it is done in post-processing in your phone, not by the hardware, not by the lens itself. So for a full frame camera, 35 millimeters, I feel like this is a good starting point, and then you can just mess around from here. Next is your autofocus, and if you go ahead and turn this on, so if I move this camera around, let's say I move it back to Gustav. Where's he at? There he is. I feel like the autofocus is based on the center of the image. So right here I have Gustav's head, and if I move it just slightly, it focuses on the wall in the background. So you can use this if you'd like, but personally I would go for a manual focus, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So let's go ahead and turn off this autofocus, and let's do it manually. So next you have your display focus point. Let's go ahead and turn that on, and you'll see something popped up there in the background. Now, to get that thing in the background to move, you're going to have your focus distance. So the higher the number, the further into the background it goes, and the lower the number, the further it gets to you. It gets to the foreground. So what I'm going to do is actually hit L2 to reset this setting. And you can see that you have this grid that's back there. So now if we move this closer, so let's move this closer to the screen, and we're gonna do this. All right, so let's start from here. So this is actually a very useful feature. I haven't seen many games do this, but I think this is a really good feature to have in a photo mode. And this here can be called focus peaking. So on an actual camera, what you can do is, if you're trying to look for focus, it outlines the areas that are in focus. And the similar applies to this photo mode with the display focus point on. So if I keep moving the focus distance, you'll see that my L is not in focus. But once this focus point starts to go past her, so we get it over there, you'll notice that anything that gets highlighted once it passes her is now in focus. So now her face is in focus, her shirt is in focus. And if I move past her arm, you'll see everything she is in focus, and then everything behind her is not in focus. And to confirm, what I can do is turn off this focus point, and then let's change the aperture down to f1, and you'll notice that everything gets blurred out except for my L. Again, very useful feature, very underrated. I wish more photo modes had this. So next is your collision, and you see that it's on. Well, let's go ahead and move back to the camera movement setting, and let's move down here. Now, if I tried to move forward with the collision on, the camera should get stopped right here. Yep, camera does not want to move through. So what happens if I turn the collision off? Go back, and now I can actually freely move through objects. People or anything that would normally cause a collision detection, I can go ahead and turn that off. That way I can freely move the camera wherever I want it. That way I can get shots like this. Next is your frame. And if we go ahead and cycle through these, you'll notice that you have your typical square and so on. But you have some that are inspired by photography and film. So if we keep going through these frames, you'll notice that you'll have a cinemascope, cinematic crop bars at the top and bottom, Panavision, IMAX. So yeah, this photo mode is heavily influenced by photography and film. Very, very nice feature. Next is your grid, and if we go ahead and turn this on, you have your rule of thirds, which you're going to see on cameras, on your phone. This is very common, and this will help you compose your shot. But if you keep going, you have a phi grid, which is based on the golden spiral, and you have cross lines as well, which will help you center your image. So if I go ahead and move to the camera, movement, I can go ahead and center, and let's do that. Let's move this, that way her eye is on that line. There we go. So far, I think this looks pretty good. So let's move on to the color grading tab. So first thing you have here is your brightness. And if you increase your brightness or decrease it, it affects the entire image. Personally speaking, I would use brightness very sparingly because it gives out a washed out image unless that's what you're going for, but the option is there for you to mess around with. Next is your temperature, and right now it's set to 6500 K, K meaning Kelvin, and this is what you'll see on an actual camera. So here it says temperature. You can also call this your white balance, and if you lower the value, you get a colder image. And if you increase your Kelvin, you'll get a warmer image. So this comes down to personal preference, but what I would always suggest is look at your theme and look at what's around you. So right now she's inside this greenhouse looking thing with a bunch of plants, so something a little bit warmer. I think 6500 looks fine as it is, but something to consider. Just what location is the character in, and what kind of feel are you going for? Something colder or something warmer? That's where your temperature comes into play. Next is your tint, and this is mainly for your greens and magenta. So if you go over here to the left, you'll notice that the entire image starts to become a lot more green. And if you go to the right, it's more magenta. So if I reset this, personally speaking, I think it's just a little too green, so I'm just going to increase it just a little bit. I think right here is a great balance where you see all the colors, but it's not pushing in one direction or the other. I think this looks great. Just remember, subtlety is key when it comes to these color grading tabs. Next is your saturation. And you actually have 4 options. You have your intensity for the entire image, and then red, green, and blue. And what saturation is mainly for your colors. So if I go to the left and decrease the value, decrease the intensity, you'll notice that it starts removing the colors altogether from the image. Already, this black and white looks fantastic. I love this. And of course, if I reset it and go the other way, this will make your colors pop. Now, if we do for the individual values, let's remove the saturation for the red. And then let's increase the green, and then maybe decrease the blue. It just gives you a completely different look. These kind of finite controls where you can really mess with the RGB scale of these settings is fantastic. I would urge you to just try it and just know that your first value, your intensity, is going to be for the whole image, and then your red, green, and blue is going to be for your individual colors. You can mix and match and find a look that works for you. Next is your contrast, and your contrast is typically your relationship between the highlights and the shadows. So if I decrease the intensity here, you'll notice that the highlights and shadows start blending in with each other, and it gives the image more of a faded look. Whereas if I increase the contrast, you'll notice that the highlights and shadows have a hard defined line between each other, and you'll be able to tell what's a highlight and what's a shadow. Highlight meaning your brighter spots of the image, and your shadow meaning your darker spots of the image. And again, you have the ability to change that for your red, green, and blue. Mess around with it, figure out what works for you. So next is your gamma. And for me to explain this, I need to go back to the brightness up at the top first. So let's say we decrease the brightness. You'll notice that the entire image, the entire screen, is getting darkened. Reset that. Let's go down back to gamma. And let's say we start decreasing the intensity of the gamma. What you'll notice is that it doesn't decrease the entire image, just the highlights. And you'll notice some detail in the background. This is more akin to an exposure tab in some sort of photography or video editing software, where you can increase or decrease your exposure, and it just limits your highlight or shadow, and you still have a lot of detail to work with. So if I increase the gamma, for example, it increases the highlights, and already it changes the whole vibe of the image. So what I would recommend is change your gamma first. That way you have the level of detail in the background that you want, and then you can adjust the brightness later if you'd like. And as with the other options above, you can also change the gamma of your reds, greens, and blues, completely changing the look of your image. Moving on to the filter tab, there's quite a few nice filters in here, especially this dawn one. I really like this one. And there's a bunch of other ones that are very fun. Let's see if I can get to those real quick. Yeah, like the oil painting, camera, CRT, and so on. There's a bunch to work with here. And then you have the intensity where you can change how much of the filter you want applied. Personally speaking, what I would do is go to your intensity, and I would set this to half. So in this case, it would be 0.5. To me, this looks a lot better, and then you can adjust it from here. But I do appreciate and I do like how it gives you the ability to tone down the filters. Some games don't have that ability, they just give you the filter and then that's it. Next is your visual effects tab. And first thing you have here is your chromatic aberration. So if we go ahead and increase this, you'll notice that the red, greens, and blues are starting to tear apart in the outskirts of the image. So this is typically considered a lens defect, and for photo editing software, there's usually like a little checkbox to remove chromatic aberration as best as possible. This is more personal preference, and the option's there for you. Next is your vignette, and if you start increasing this, you'll notice that a circle from the outside of the image going inwards starts to appear. And what this does is that it darkens the edges of your image, and it gives you more focus onto the center of the image. So for me, a vignette is a make or break, but play around with it and see what works for you. Next is your bloom. And if you increase this, it's a very subtle effect, but what you'll notice is that where your sources of light are, so in this case, it'll be in the background, it'll give off a nice glow. So let's say if I increase this all the way, and then I go ahead and reset it, you'll notice that there was a glow there before I reset it. That's typically what your bloom is, a glow around your source of light. Next is your film grain, and this is just personal preference if you'd like to add some. Next, you have a characters tab, and it's just very simple. You can hide the characters or hide your enemies. So let's move on to the lighting tab. So here we see light 1, but actually you can go up to 10 lights on one image. And you have two different types of light. You have a point light and a spotlight. And let me show you the difference. So if we do point light, let's hit circle to move the light. If I move it around, which by the way, if you move it and hold the slow mode, it actually affects the light as well. This point light is a sphere. It's like a glowing sphere. And if we go back and we change it to a spotlight, go back to moving it. If we hold the slow mode and use the right analog stick, you'll notice that it's a cone, kind of like a traditional light that you would use as like a YouTuber or something. Now I'm going to keep it on spotlight mainly because there are two settings down here, inner cone and outer cone. They're only available for the spotlight. So like if I show you, for example, go back to point light and I go down, those two options are not available. So we'll stick with the spotlight for now. So if we want to light someone, what I want to do first is I want the cone to be facing them at an angle, and I want the light above pointing down, and then maybe move back a little bit, something like this. So the first option you have is your intensity. So how bright is the light? Very simple, straightforward. Next is your color, same thing. What color do you want? And you'll notice that it's not really doing anything because you need to turn on your color intensity first. So if we increase the color intensity, you'll notice that it starts changing into the color, and then from here you can actually choose which color you want. So for now, I'll just leave it on white. Next is cast shadows, and this comes down to personal preference, but personally speaking, I would leave it on just because it looks a little bit more realistic. Next is your attenuation radius, and this took me some time to figure out what this meant, but I think I figured it out. So if I decrease this, it seems like it's the same as brightness, but I think what this is the light emitting from the spotlight itself. How far is it going from the light to your subject? So if I decrease this, you'll notice it first starts like on her shoulder, and then it increases. The size of it increases. So it's going from the light to Mael further once I increase the radius, if that makes sense. I hope I'm making sense on this one. Just imagine like an arrow, and it's slowly moving from the light to your subject. Whereas the intensity is just how bright the light is. Does that make sense? I hope I make sense. Alright, so I had to change the scene. I was getting confused while recording this. So here's the light facing the plants and these piping right here. So let's go back to the attenuation radius. If I decrease this, you'll see what I'm talking about. Going from the light to your subject. So in this case, it would be the plants in the background and the pipes. So if I decrease this, you'll notice that it starts getting removed from the plants in the background, and it'll start working its way to the pipe and then back to the light. You see that? So the attenuation radius is the distance between your light and your subject. So these next 4 settings I'm going to mess around with really fast, but I hope you can understand what I'm about to say. So since this is a spotlight, I'm going to go to the outer cone angle first, and I'm actually going to reduce this. That way you'll see that it's a smaller circle. So now you have your source radius. So for the lighting, if I increase this, right, it's basically saying the light itself, like how wide is the light inside of the cone. And you can see that little bright highlight right there on the piping. And then if I go down to soft source radius and I increase this, what this does, it softens up that light. It's very hard to see, but do you see that? It softens up that light. So imagine there's 2 ways to look at this. One, if you're working with actual lighting, your source radius would be your light itself, and then your soft source radius would be a softbox that's over the light. Another way to look at this is your soft source radius is the feather on some sort of photo editing software, where you have a brush and you can increase the size of the source radius or increase the brush, and your soft source radius would be the feather, where it's smoothing out the edges. And your inner angle will go hand in hand with your outer angle. So the outer angle will be how flared is your cone, your spotlight specifically, and your inner cone, if you start increasing this, it starts to create something in the middle and it works its way outwards. You'll be able to see it here on the pipe here. You see that? So it starts in the middle and then it flares out towards the outer cone angle. Next is your volumetric scattering intensity. And this is basically your bloom, but specifically for the lighting that you put. So if I increase this, it's very subtle, but notice the piping and towards the bottom, you'll notice that it increases the bloom, the glow that you see from the light. So if I go all the way to the end here, and if I reset it, you'll be able to see a very subtle shift. So now how would we use the lighting on an actual subject? So I want to start with this point light first. So if we move this, what I want to do is actually move this above and towards the back. You'll see that it creates this glow on her hair here. You see that? So since you have up to 10 lights you can work with, you have the ability to move the lights around and give off these glows in different sections. So in this case, I'm going to use one up here. That way her hair is highlighted. And what I actually want to do is, let's increase the intensity of the color just so I can see it. And I want to give it a warmer glow. So something like this, and then bring the intensity back down. So that way there's a warm light that's glowing on her hair. And if we add another light, this one I want it to be a spotlight. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this like that. We're going to move right here. I'm trying to move it slowly. Kind of point it at her. Go up. And then kind of go down. Maybe move it back a little bit. Just something like this. Where you see the shadows. Her face is lit up, but not too much. And then actually I can bring down the intensity a little bit. And I think just generally speaking, the lighting I already like as it is. And then actually what I want to do is go back to the color grading and I want to decrease the gamma. That way the background is a little bit darker. And then I'm going to go back to the lighting and increase the intensity. Yeah, this is looking very good. And I think the only other thing I want to change at the moment is giving the picture a vignette. So if I increase this, kind of focuses more inwards. And then I actually want to stop down the aperture a little bit more because I feel like it's too blurry in the background. So maybe something like this. I think F8 looks good. Yeah, that's it. This shot looks really good. If you found this video helpful, please like this video and check out this playlist of other photo modes I've looked at in other games. That's going to be it for me today, and I'll see you next time.